Great, thanks. So I have some questions that I'm going to start with, but please everybody start typing in questions. So yeah, I have a few questions from the start, actually mostly about some of the technical elements of the projects that you, Bill and Aisha, have put together, which are really, really interesting. I think an obvious question is, how do you get this data? I'm interested in, Bill, for instance, how you get all the qualitative data from so many, many, many schools. Obviously, it's something that's really difficult for, I mean, around here, in New Orleans, at least with so many different school systems and charters, you actually would have to call schools directly in some cases for it, which obviously you can't do in a big scale. So yeah, actually, Bill, if you could answer that, that would be great.
So where we get the qualitative data, we find, so that the type that's reviews, to some degree, will come in by virtue of asking for it. So we're engaging primarily online. We do, as Aisha, the New Orleans Parent Guide does in New Orleans, in some cities we do also publish print guides, but primarily our work is online. And online is a good way to solicit parent reviews or student reviews. We're interested in larger scale ways to do that. What about a city making it common to share publicly, at least, maybe once a year, once every 2 years, there's a big effort to collect on a widespread basis opinion about schools across many schools through the school system. That would be a promising innovation, I think. The other kind of qualitative information comes from a variety of sources. In some communities, we can go to where we have local programs. We go to school districts and we say, hey, what can you tell us system-wide about the different kinds of programs that are in your schools, sports or curricular type of programs, special support programs for students with special needs. And we can get some that way. Sometimes, though, principals themselves will log in and then provide information. And it's even interesting to think about, we do a little bit of this already, crowdsourcing. You could ask parents whether the school has girls basketball, and if most parents say it does, well then it does. So that's a potential way to scale that type of information. And then there's the old-fashioned feet on the street. You go out and you visit schools. You call schools.
So let's switch to Aisha for a minute, because I also have the question for her of how she got, how you get information for this. I mean, is this information that reporters can get, or is it something that you have to have a special agreement for?
The information in the Parents Guide?
Yeah.
So we develop relationships. I mean, I think that schools are about relationships, and I think that schools view the Parents Guide as an important resource for families. I think that in this environment in which they feel that they also need to market themselves, they see it as an opportunity to speak directly to families. So they cooperate. I mean, we don't have special agreements. We work closely with the Recovery School District and Orleans Parish School Board around data. I think coming to some shared overlapping beliefs about what information parents need and what's important for parents to know in order to get that. So that's a cooperative process. And it involves some tensions around what data is valid, what kind of information is available, what's collected, and what parents want to know, right? So there's a lot of complexity in that, but I think schools, in terms of the information that they report, so the information that we collect directly from schools is all program-based. What kind of programming do you offer? What kind of services and supports are available at the school? And I think, we work with schools to help them see the importance of providing thorough and timely information. I think occasionally there's an sort of inclination to overstate what's provided. And one of the things that we kind of circle back to schools about, and something that we hear from families a lot, is they don't want to know what you hope to someday provide. They want to know what you are doing now, because what you don't want as a school or as a family is a mismatch, where you sign up for a school that says, we have a comprehensive art program and you know, all the kids are learning to paint, you know, and use, you know, like studying the great masters, but that's like something you're developing and it's going to be really in place in 3 years, then families get there and they're frustrated because it's not actually happening now. So this is something, an example of that, and a way that we check back and forth is we ask about parent groups because families want to know if there's organized parent groups at schools. It says something about the sort of school community and how parents might have a voice in decision making at the school. And so we've asked schools, do you have a parent group? Now, everybody wants to have a parent group. Not everybody has a parent group. They might be in the development of a parent group. And so definitely in the last few years, we've tried to be even more strict with that. And we say to schools, you have to tell us parent leaders in that group before we will let you have a yes in that category. So we're not just going to trust that you say that you do when you don't, but we also need some additional backup information that we're not going to publish. We're not publishing Miss Smith's phone number in the parents guide, but we want that information. I mean, that we use those kinds of strategies. I also think that, as to your point, Danielle, it is much easier to do this. It is difficult to do it in New Orleans, but it's easier than it would be nationally because, again, relationships, right? Like, we, as the staff of the Parents Guide, know a lot of parents whose kids are going to the schools. So sometimes we hear something that we think, I'm not sure that that's entirely true, and we can actually call and talk to some parents, which is, you know, I guess like rudimentary crowdsourcing, like Bill is saying. So.
Right. And I should mention, actually, I forgot to put in Aesha's introduction that she's a former education reporter for the Times-Picayune. So she has also seen things from the reporter side. All right, I'm going to turn to some of the questions that we have coming in. Please continue to send more. One question actually to start with was on the EWA listserv was, what can we tell when you walk into a school what that school is like the sort of a qualitative experiential data, and especially, you know, as reporters, we're unfortunately more often than not in schools in some kind of handled way, right? We probably aren't given free rein to just roam around, or we're there for an event. So yeah, I know I certainly want to have a sense of what I should be looking at in the school to say, oh, they're doing this really well, or this is a sign of student engagement. So what's your advice on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a big, what we tell parents, and I think what I found as a reporter, is to try to find ways to look aside from what you're just being shown, right? So if you're on a school tour and you're being taken into certain classrooms, you know, try to find the opportunity to like take a peek into a classroom that maybe you're not being explicitly toured. And I know that's tricky as a reporter, that it's like not about being sneaky, but also about just like taking it in. So, you know, our first thing is the school cheerful and clean, right? Like, that's kind of like an order, a basic order. Like, this place looks basically clean. There's cheerfulness. I think that once upon a time we thought that putting a lot of things on walls, like a classroom that has a lot of stuff on its walls, meant that a lot of things were happening. And I think that what we have learned, that it's not so much about clutter as it is about using educational space, right? So the difference between walking through a building where you see a bulletin board full of full of like cute pictures, versus a bulletin board that's asking students questions, right? Or using that space interactively as part of the learning process. So thinking about like, what are students learning in the environment around them? What is the environment teaching them? I think that's a big thing. The interactions between the kids and between the adults and the students, right? Like, do they seem loving and authentic? Do they seem supportive? You know, do students seem to be interacting with each other in authentic ways? I think those are all things that I feel like you can get a sense of when you walk around a school. Can you judge the school entirely based just on that sense? Journalistically, no. Like, you shouldn't be saying like, this is a bad school, this is a good school, based on my gut. But you can, I think, get a real sense. And I know that when I was a reporter walking into schools, I often was in the experience of going to schools that were very struggling, where there was no sense of order. no one was in the office, and no one really asked me any questions, and there wasn't really any sort of sense of adult supervision. And those schools turned out to be schools that were not great places for kids. And then I'd go into a school where students seemed to be moving around and freely and happily, and the adults were speaking respectfully with kids, and there was life there, like a feeling of life. That's what I'm looking for in a school. That's what I think a lot of parents are looking for in a school. And I think, not the overly controlled, no one is speaking out of line. This is, a very much a dog and pony show experience, right? So.
Yeah, I'd add one thought to is that within the range, I agree with Aisha that there are these, you can sometimes really see extremes as far as there really isn't order and there's not organization. But within the range of schools that don't fall into that, we find parents can react quite differently to, I'll give you two scenarios. One is there's sort of a happy, slightly, or more than slightly noisy, not chaos, but energy. There's a little bit of bumping into each other and bumping off the walls and a kind of excitement and engagement that is, it also comes with some level of disorder. And then there is if you walk into one of those certain kinds of charter schools, in New Orleans, for example, you're going to see kids moving from classroom to classroom in quiet lines with hardly a word being spoken. And these impressions sometimes, right? Sometimes parents walk into a school and they immediately know, oh, I want that, or I don't want that. And for some parents will be chaos, will for others be a sign of life. And so understanding the range of interests on the part of parents and also kind of what constitutes reasonable range versus where that boundary is over towards chaos or even too much order is an interesting question, I think.
Great. So a question here from Sarah with the Orange County Register is her area, so some districts are not open to school choice. Their websites don't have much information. Some don't allow parent school tours. So at that point, what should parents ask or do to get information about these schools?
Right. Well, a thought there is, for one, they all have GreatSchools profiles. Mm-hmm. And there are other services, too, that are national where they can find information. So test scores are there, and there are other quantitative types of data information as well as the qualitative reviews. If there is no school choosing allowed, Aisha, I'd be curious about your experience in this regard. I once went to a district in California where, this was in our early days, and I said, well, we're doing profiles of your schools. And the response was, why? This was a small district that only had 3 schools. So very different than, say, New Orleans. And she said, well, why do you want to do profiles? I said, well, because we want to help parents understand the differences and unique features and strengths of your schools, as well as what might be a better fit for their child. And she said, there are no differences between our schools, which was not true. But the reason she said that is there was so much tension in the community. There was no choice. And if the schools were not seen as being the same, she, the superintendent of the small district, was going to get a lot of grief. Mm-hmm. To be aware of as a reporter, I think, is to what extent are you getting a wall put up in front of you about information because the education official believes that any admission of difference is tantamount to inviting a small riot in their community. Mm-hmm. It's difficult for the education for administrators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the Parents Guide is certainly a response to school choice and also the devastation of schools in New Orleans. But it isn't. We don't think of it as its main purpose to be about people choosing schools, as much as it is about people becoming familiar with schools in their community. So if you're a parent whose kid is in a school, you have first-hand knowledge that the Parents Guide might not be adding value to, but probably is. Like, you might not know what the student turnover rate was last year, and that might help you sort of think about what can you do to maybe improve the amount of students who return, or think about things that you want to see change at your kid's school. So I think it's important, like, to me, the solution to not having a school serve your needs is not necessarily to go somewhere else. It's actually to engage with that school to try to make it what it needs to be, because we can't just keep switching between schools as a solution. Like, that's not actually solving having every kid have access to an excellent school. So I think that's a part of it. I really, here in New Orleans, I mean, in Louisiana, districts aside from New Orleans, where there's maybe not school choice in the way that we have in New Orleans, have expressed an interest, and parents are interested in this information, right? And I think, and they have a right to this information. And I think that journalists, it's important part of the job and role of journalists to assert that right to information about schools, because like schools are a public entity. They belong to us all. We all deserve to understand what's happening in schools so that we can actually live out our collective responsibility to support the existence of schools. So I think that's kind of, I mean, I know that we'd have to soften that in talking to officials, but I don't know, I think that helping them remember that they are stewards of a public trust, right? Not a private entity that is just theirs to manage and run or be interested in.
Yeah, and a little data relevant to that is that about half of the usage of GreatSchools nationally is in relationship to choosing. But the other half of looking at school information is not. It's as Aesha is describing. It's kind of it's public information. It's understanding the schools, your child's school or the schools in your community, and with that information being better able to be engaged and involved.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question here from Randy with the Idaho Education News, and this question is for me, but I'm also going to expand it out. So the question is, when we at the Picayune listed teacher ratings on the websites, was there pushback about privacy issues and or from the unions, and how did we deal with that? That's an interesting question. So first of all, the state makes a big deal of releasing the teacher evaluation data. Where the union pushback comes in is on the front end, so designing the evaluation system itself. So and we've seen this, I think, all across the country, a lot of places where teacher evaluations are pretty test score heavy, especially. In Louisiana, it's 50% student growth on tests, or student growth on learning targets. And so and I would say the state is, some of us would say, to a fault, careful about certain, how to put this. I mean, the state wasn't going to put out individual teachers and their ratings, as far as I know. So I believe that would be considered a personnel matter. I'm not the expert on privacy and public information law here. So basically, schools were potentially interested, I think, in justifying why do you have so many good teachers or so many bad teachers, but we didn't get a lot of that directly to us for some reason. Maybe they weren't paying as much attention to the stories. The bigger question that I have, though, is I don't think that the teacher evaluation ratings in Louisiana really say all that much, because a lot of it is based on who's doing the observations in the classroom and how strict they are. And just the fact when we looked at them that there were F schools with a lot of great teachers, I know I found really confusing. So my question for you guys is, like, what do you have and what can you get to help to just show parents something about what the teachers in the schools are like? Because this is so important for parents. It just seems to be everybody's #1 concern.
Yeah.
Aesha?
Sure. So that is a huge, I think that's one of the real weaknesses in the kind of information that parents have access to in New Orleans right now. We have in addition to being a nonprofit with a board of parents, and also we have a parent advisory council, and then listening to parents over the 9 years of producing the Parents Guide and asking what they want to know, it consistently comes up is that they want to know about who's teaching. And that's not to say that they necessarily want somebody to tell them this person's good or this person's bad. I think some parents want that, and some folks wish that there was a simple answer to that. But people want to know, who are you, right? Like what kind of background, how many years of teaching, where have you taught, where do you come from, right? And we have really not been able to get that information. I think part of it, philosophically, there's tension and pushback about what parents have the right to know. And in our case, I'm not hearing that pushback from like unions or teachers so much as it is from folks who are concerned that if parents knew or thought that a lot of teachers were very young and new, that would look bad. Or I think that I don't want to, but it does seem to be the pushback around that, making that information available. But then aside from that, I think pushing through that, and we can have those philosophical debates. Also, we don't seem to have good data about who's teaching. And that's something that I think we need to work on, is like, how do we get much better data about who is teaching in schools, and make that stuff available, that information available to parents, because that's part of what they want to know, that these are the people who are going to care for your child for 8 hours of the day. And I think it's reasonable to have a desire to want to know a little bit more about who the folks are. And I also think that learning to trust that families have more complex views of who should teach than what maybe we're being told, because certainly families want a mix. Every conversation I've ever had with parents about schools, with regular people, is they want to see a mix of types of people in the school, young and old, black and white, and all ethnicities, coming from different backgrounds, local and from out of town. Like, they actually want to see a healthy mix. And I think that seems right for what kids actually need. So I think that we just need to push through the fear and unpack that and start giving people the information that they really are asking for.
And this is a big question, is what do you think is the most important thing for reporters to know about data that parents care about? Either of you guys can take it.
So I would say that it's really important to help people understand what data can and can't tell them, right? I think that as a reporter, that was something that I felt we had to do a good job of, keep doing that, to keep talking about what is it telling you. Because, for example, we provide data about how students are performing on the test, right? But that's one snapshot. It doesn't tell you how students started off, right? So a school with a lot of students who seem to be scoring at sort of an average place might be doing an amazing job getting kids from way below average to average, right? Another school that has students performing at like a slightly above average place might have gotten all of their students kind of already there. And so I think context really, really, really matters. And I think we can't underestimate how important it is to keep explaining. Most people, I think most adults, don't spend a lot of time on data analysis, and we're not always asking good critical questions, and I think that reporters have to keep those good critical questions in mind and sort of push into data and not just accept it as sort of Bible, as this impermeable information just because it's given to you as a data point. I think we have to question and lean into question and help families, help parents, and help communities question, what do we want to know? The other thing I would say that I think is really important for education reporters in this country is to try to keep setting the agenda around what do we want out of schools, right? So we are measuring things and providing data. Are they measuring what we want schools to be doing, right? And who gets to say that, and how should we be saying that? I think that's an important conversation that we need to keep having in this country and in our communities.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with all of what you said, Aisha, particularly at the end. Where fostering critical thinking, just fostering thinking about what do you want from a school, what do we want from school. I think one of the tensions in this area is that you hear probably often as reporters a statement, something to the effect of, well, I don't think my state's standardized test does a very good job of measuring student learning or how much students know. And there is truth to that. You know, I think all of us on the call who are parents, on the webinar who are parents, realize that certain things that you hope from schooling, even within the academic realm, are not well measured by test scores. Like, could your child collaborate well with other kids to solve problems that neither of them could solve on their own? That's a really useful adult skill. That is not measured by test scores. And then we could get into the social emotional things and other kind of, you know, sense of purpose or engagement with the world that we hope schools will foster. And in our opinion, it is also true that a school for which on a typical state tests 20% of high-need students, whether that be defined as students from historically disadvantaged backgrounds or low income, are meeting state standards, which typically aren't that high, then we also have to question, wait a minute, in addition to all these other questions, do we have a problem with the school helping students reach sort of a basic level of competence to be able to function well in society? And so I think the tension between those 2 points of view, I think it's very important as reporters, that reporters not view the world in really either or ways, you know, like rejecting or fully buying into the different camps, because this stuff gets pretty tribal.
Thank you guys so much for being with us today. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you to Bill. Thank you for everybody on the webinar. Yeah, thank you for being here. Have a good day.